Good morning, Aztlan. This is Ernesto Ayala, your chair of El Partido de la Raza Unida, coming live from Pacuema, Califaslan, in el Valle de San Fernando. I'd like to welcome you to this, our new program, which will be airing Tuesdays and Thursdays, 6 a.m. Pacific, 8 a.m. Central, and 9 a.m. Eastern Time. As the chair of La Raza Unida, we have a program that will be bringing you news and information of the partido, what the partido has been doing, history of the partido. A lot of people, not a fault of theirs, but I believe that the Raza Unida and the Chicano movement in general stopped functioning in the mid 1970s, and that is completely false. The partido has been here, has been struggling, organizing, has been in the barrios since then up till now. And with us, joining us, will be two compañeros, California State Chair Cynthia Garcia and Andrew Ayala in Texaslan. On this show, we'll bring a lot of different topics. We will also talk about general Chicano history. What is a Chicano? What is a Chicana? What is La Raza? What is Aztlan? Why do all these concepts continue existing within our people, or do they even still exist? So general trends and ideas in the movimiento and news that is pertinent to the raza. So I would like to present the compañeros, the compañeras. Andrew Ayala, to present yourself, brother.
Hey, how's it going? This is Andrew Ayala. Over here in Oak Cliff in Dallas, in Texas. Originally from Michigan, though.
Vale. And compañera Cynthia.
What's up, Aztlan? This is Cynthia Garcia. I am hailing from San Diego, Califaslan.
Vale. And so I think, a lot of people, believe that the partido, stopped functioning a long time ago, and that a lot of people, sadly believe the Chicano movement no longer exists at all. I think both of you are a testament to, that not being true at all. You both, have been involved with the partido for a few years now. I know you've been involved in your communities for a good while, pero, maybe you could both, let us know a little bit how did you even get involved to begin with? I mean, I don't know who'd like to go first, Cynthia or Andrew, pero whoever, just go for it, ¿verdad? Just let us know.
I'll go ahead and jump in and go first then. But yeah, no, I've been knowing about the Partido for a while. I remember even growing up in the 90s. I knew what it was, and it's always something that was kind of like an aspiration for me. Even growing up in Michigan, which is a place, that isn't always necessarily associated with the Chicano movement, but we have Chicanos there too, and we've had the Partido up there as well.
Yep.
So it's something that I always had a big interest in. Now that being said, in terms of our involvement in Michigan, it did tail off over there. So I've always been greatly involved in, what the Partido had offered, and I wanted to see that coming around again. So I was really excited when I saw that, it never stopped existing, but I saw like new life being breathed into it. When we started to get a lot more momentum. So I know when I actually linked up, it was during the pandemic, actually. I had a little bit more time on my hands. My day job is as a teacher. Actually, I teach Chicano studies. So I had some time, and I came across, the website. Well, actually, no, let me backtrack. Before I went to the website, there was a really good page, Telejaguar, great content. Some of those videos still live long in my memory. That's actually what brought me to the first step, because I was like, got some cool videos on here, but then also some really good, like politically conscious stuff. So I said, let me follow up, see more what's going on here. And that's where I saw that, we had online study groups. And I was like, this is perfect, a chance to connect with other like-minded people. And, I'm not gonna lie, before the pandemic, I had no idea what Zoom was. I had never heard of that in my life. But then, it seemed like we transitioned to that, and that's what everything was centered around. So I said, okay, let me go check this out. So I really loved it immediately. I felt like I was at home. I was like, these people out get it. This is definitely the same page that I'm on. Because I'll be honest, it's tough here in Texas sometimes. We have a long road to go in terms of like building not just the strength of the party, but the strength of our people. you know, despite our numbers, you know, there's something to be desired in terms of our organization and the way that we perceive ourselves over here. So yeah, no, that's how I got into it. You know, I've been living it ever since, you know, and I've been really impressed by the growth that we've had. But that's enough of me talking. Let's flip it over to Cynthia.
How do you even go after that? So the funny thing is, I was actually brought in by Andrew. So when I was younger, I had heard about El Partido, but not really to the point where I was able to dive deep into it the way we have, I guess, in the last 2 years. I remember they talked about it a little bit when I was younger in San Diego, just kind of going to Chicano Park, watching the Chicano documentary, the PBS one. That's how I began kind of self-identifying as Chicana. So after that is when I started doing my own research, because obviously we all know that the traditional K through 12 education, even here in Califaslan, is not one that is going to talk about our particular history in a truthful way. So I ended up just kind of researching on my own and learning on my own, and ultimately where I'm at right now as a counselor, as a faculty at 2 community colleges, but now I get to teach it. I got hired as an adjunct just a couple of weeks ago at one of the colleges here to teach Chicano studies. So that's exciting. But yeah, we were doing some Chicano studies classes at the University of New Mexico. And Andrew ended up saying, hey, there's El Partido going on and there's study groups and whatnot. So that's how I actually got involved, which is great because fortunately, like I mentioned, we don't get to learn about this. And a lot of the young Chicanitas and Chicanitos don't understand the value of our own our self-education and our empowerment, and something like this is what they can learn from. So I agree with Andrew. There's a lot that we've grown quite a bit, but it was a struggle trying to do everything over the pandemic. So now it's the time to kind of just branch out and do what we need to do.
Yeah. And that's interesting that you're saying how it's something that we don't learn in school. Even here in Califas, with just like Texas, with so much raza, we're already the majority in both states. We have such a long history. I mean, basically the first people there, unless you separate us from our native tribal raza, who many of them are Chicanos, Mexicanos, anyways. But and it's interesting to see how I think a lot of people that are in education, come, with that mentality, that are involved and are in education. A lot of Chicanos, a lot of Chicanos that are in education. Do you think it was that led you, towards education? For both of you. I mean, was it that desire, to teach what you weren't taught?
I think that's one of the biggest I think it's one of the biggest inspirations and motivations for us, is that studies show that our people need a place to have community and empowerment. And when they don't have that, when they don't see it, whether it's in their instructors, their counselors, they don't see it in higher ed, or they just don't see it in general in their educational institutions, that's a problem. And I think a lot of our students, just back when you look at the at the walkouts, that's what they wanted, right? That's what these students wanted. They wanted people to look like them. They wanted to study their own history. And the fact that even up to this day, yes, we've grown quite a bit, but it's still not even at the level when you compare the population, like you mentioned, Nestor, right? We're pretty much the majority in the Aztlan area, and even then we still are fighting to have Chicano and Chicana studies classes in our school. So I think for me, that was my biggest motivation, is to have students understand that there are people that come from the barrio, there is raza that can go through the different things that we go through, the institutional racism, the unfortunate experiences that we go through as Chicanas and Chicanos, and still make it. So that was my motivation. So yeah.
I mean, for me, I kind of had a little bit of a roundabout way that actually ended up in education. I always loved to learn, but I hated school. And part of the reason I hated school, though, honestly, is because, as I was older, I realized, hey, the educational system wasn't necessarily created with me in mind, in terms of really kind of pushing me to excel and really develop my mind. Looking back at it in retrospect, and it goes along with, what we see historically as well. The public education system is really just kind of designed to churn out some Americans, in terms of people's cultural outlook. So, and I was never really on that vibe. Fortunately, I had a dad who really kind of educated me politically at a very young age. One of the stories I always tell people, like, my dad had me read Malcolm X's autobiography when I was in second
Wow.
grade. So, I was definitely, on a different vibe than, my classmates. And I was like, this just isn't it for me. But, I still kind of had this expectation in my mind. I was supposed to go to college. So I had this college degree, but I didn't really know what to do with it, to be honest. It did cross my mind to be a teacher in Michigan, but I didn't go to school for education in Michigan. I would have had to go back for 2 years. I was like, ooh, that's tough. Um, but then I actually relocated to Texas, and unfortunately, I mean, they've modified it slightly, but in Texas they have really low standards, just to keep it real for who can be a teacher. You just need to have your bachelor's degree for the most part, and then you need to agree to join, the certification program where they take a cut of your check. They're like, we don't care that you didn't actually go to, like school for education. You can teach that, K through 12 in Texas. And the reason I point all that out is because we are actually the majority on our own of the K through 12 students in Texas. So it's kind of a reflection on, the lack of a desire to actually have standards to try to promote things for the students. So that's how I got my start in education that way. Now, that being said, to navigate over to Chicano studies, I mean, they call it Mexican American studies here. But there is a big difference between the two names, between what they call it and what I call it, to be honest. We'll definitely get into that, in the future for sure. Um, I know that was kind of a process, for me as well. When I got my first job, it was teaching Spanish. I was like, okay, well, this is interesting. Um, but I have a master's degree in history, so I was able to slide over to U.S. history, which teaching U.S. history in Texas, let me tell you, that's an interesting experience. They have it tied to the state test, that you're supposed to pass to graduate. So they try to make it really regimented. But when you look at the stuff that they want you to teach, the historical accuracy is not that important, definitely promoting a lot of myths. But there's also the fact that we're almost completely erased from the curriculum as well. I know when I was teaching it to my students at the school, it was like 2,200 students, and the demographics, 98% Raza. Out of that, probably about 95%, derived from being Mexican. Um, and I would changed how I taught the curriculum, which, to be honest, my test scores were always lower than my colleagues. But I was like, how am I not going to teach these kids about their history? I was like, almost all of them, are Raza. I am, the principal was. And I was like, how am I going to sell them, this white man's vision of what history was and deny them all of that, especially because I always spent all this time learning on my own. I was excited to share it with the students. So when I did get the opportunity to slide over to Chicano Studies, I think that suited the school. I don't think that they really liked my vibe for U.S. history. But with Chicano Studies, that's honestly what's kept me in education. So that's kind of like my winding path to get there. But with Chicano Studies, we can do a whole lot more with it. So that's what's keeping me involved and interested in it.
So you read Malcolm X, the autobiography of Malcolm X at what age?
I was 8 years old.
Wow.
And yeah, no, because my dad noticed that I was really into reading and I was, reading at a pretty high level. So he said, let me drop this book on him. But it was funny because I gave a book report on it. I know my teacher was sitting there thinking, man, what in the world is going on with this child? But but it
Really,
was
like supposed to.
yeah, but no, it was really eye-opening, my dad always encouraged that kind of thought. I know Cynthia mentioned earlier, with that Chicano series that PBS put out, the struggle for Mexican American civil rights.
Yeah.
I mean, that's still kind of like the gold standard in a way for the documentaries. I know like 10 years ago, PBS did the Latino Americans. That was not too good in my book.
Yeah.
But that four-part series, that was really foundational for me as well. I remember we recorded it off the TV, so we had the VHS copies.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was like in middle school trying to have all my friends come over to my house. they're probably like, oh man, we want to keep coming over here. But I remember being really inspired by it when I saw it. You know, honestly, I still watch the full four episodes of it at least once a year. Um, you know, because it is, like I said, unfortunately, you know, at this point, like 27 years later, still kind of the gold standard for it.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, no, so I did get an early start when I was young in terms of how I thought about myself, how I saw my role in society. Um, I know, I'm trying to remember how the quote went. I remember my dad used to always tell me this quote, and I'll be honest, I don't know who it's attributed to. Um, but it was in terms of, you know, whether or not we're, you know, Americans, quote unquote, just for being born here, and that's how we should identify.
Mm.
I remember there was what he said is, if a cat has kittens in the oven, that doesn't make them biscuits. Which was memorable. I remember him saying it all the time when I was little, but that was really important for me because I was like, okay, yeah, no, I was born, you know, within this country. My passport says United States, but that's not actually my identity. You know, I have a different identity.
Was that Malcolm X?
What's that?
Was that Malcolm X that said something like that?
I think it was. Yeah, I didn't want to like misattribute it, but I'm pretty sure that's who it was. My dad was a big fan of Malcolm X.
Right on.
So it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. You know, I mean, it's the that four-part series that was very powerful, man. I remember watching that. You know, 27 years ago. That was a while back, man. I remember watching that, and I was like, wow, you know, finally something about us, finally something that calls us what we call ourselves, you know, and isn't. I mean, it wasn't like all the way total revolutionary, but it was like a very good, it was like very honest, you know. It talked like four main things about our struggle, you know, the land, the struggle in the schools, it's the building the party. What was the other one? Oh my God,
Education.
Yeah.
education, you know. Este, um, and it was very impacting, man. I'm there for me. I remember watching. There's that one part where they're talking about the land, and then it's like right before they go into talking about Aztlan and all that, and they're in New Mexico. They're showing like they're padding out some stuff, some area in New Mexico, and in the background is this man. Who was his name? Ulibarri. He was like a poet, story writer from New Mexico, and he's saying something about it's how the land was sacred, because that's where you grew up, that's where your parents and grandparents también, like they worked that land, so you were a part of the land and the land was a part of you, man. And I remember hearing that as a kid, and I was like, man, that's so true, like that's what when we talk about Aztlan, when we talk about the reason Chicanos are so connected, to the barrio, even if they're first generations, because we identify with the land, like we see ourselves in the land, and the history of it, the very little that we know, so yeah, that I mean, just think about it, like 27 years ago, and that's like one of the only things that we have, in the mainstream.
You didn't even have to watch it, Ernesto. You were kind of having all that in like your backyard, I feel, with your dad and your family, so. But I think even though it was a long time ago, and unfortunately, I think that's the sad part, is that even how long it's been, we still go to it. Like it's still, like Andrew mentioned, it still seems to be that pinnacle. Like I show it every single year in my class. Like I make my students watch it. I make my Metra students watch it, because unfortunately there hasn't been much since then that really shows the history as deep as well as that did. And I think there is space for something newer, but that they did such a good job with that. Yeah. That it's still a great documentary to show, even in 2023. But that also just says something about where we've come and where we could still go, because unfortunately the omission of the how the K-12 system, and how just in general the education system, the American education system, how it omits the war atrocities that Anglo-American histories has led these people, right, not us, but them, to believe that everything was so glamorous and we lost a very fair fight, and that's we should be grateful that we're still here. Like that bothers me to like my core. And I think that's why they don't understand that we don't know our history the way we should have been told, right? The way that I don't think people understand how the fact that we are conquered people, we are the only ones besides our indigenous brothers and sisters are the only people in the US who were forced to become part of this country, even after the occupation of the lands by Anglo-American troops. So it's unfortunate because this documentary is great, but I think there's so much more that we can do, but we still go back to it because of how great it was.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a straight up telling us, telling us what we already should know. But yeah, it's it's a very good documentary. It's I watch it all the time. I'll take clips from it. And they were like that one part. I always remember that part. Like sometimes I just go back to that one little part just to hear that senor talk. Very impactful.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot in just that one little clip. Like why, we, I think the character to our people is the land. Like we can identify with the land. Like our native, which again a lot of them are Chicanos, and Chicanos are native también. But besides them, there's other groups of people cannot identify with the land that way. And we can, because we belong to it. So that they're very powerful documentaries. And um, este, but yeah, the fact that um, there could be so much done in education, and there's a lot of people, that in academia, that could do a lot more, with all the resources they have, but unfortunately, I mean, we're fortunate to have that, but unfortunately, that's all we have, But yeah, I find that interesting, and I find how a lot of Chicanos that get involved, they're in education, in one way or another, they're in education, they're doing something to be in touch with the youth, because at least I mean that's the goal that I'm going to también, I just graduated last year with my BA finally, Chicano studies también, I still need to get my credentials, but that's my ultimate goal is to be a teacher también, because I think we feel that responsibility to the next generation, and that's a beautiful thing. That's a beautiful thing. That's beautiful what you both are doing, you're educators and you've taken on that responsibility, because I've worked in education, I've been a TA at an elementary school, but my dad was a teacher, so I was sort of in touch with it, and then I have a lot of friends that are educators as well. So I know it could be a tough and demanding job, but I know the people that stick in there and are doing it, and that are of consciousness, are doing it because they actually care, you really care for the raza, so I highly commend that a lot, to both of you, compas.
Well,
No,
likewise, because CSUN, that's like one of the top schools in Califaslan to do Chicano studies, one of the first ones too. I wanted to go to CSUN, so I was very jealous when you graduated from there. But I think one thing that maybe all of us have learned, unfortunately, is that we understand how important education is. And I think that's one way to advocate. And when you're a Chicana and Chicano activist, that's one way you have to do it, I think many people are, it's easy for people to say, oh, well, why don't you just go out there and protest? Because we don't want to die. Let's be real. Unfortunately, at this point, Black and brown, if we go protest, a lot of people can get hurt, can get arrested, and ultimately die. And I mean, I don't care if I get arrested for something that I stand for, but when people are dying, that's something different. So I think we've all understood that to an extent, that piece of paper, right? That formal quote unquote education is important for us to be able to get to that next generation, right? And I think it's unfortunate because I think for you, Ernesto, you don't even need a piece of paper. The fact that you've been involved in that since you were a fetus, I think I think you don't even need a piece of paper. Like you're good, you're official. but it's that's the way I think that we are going to be able to get through a lot of generations and a lot of students is by, you know, kind of going into the education system and you know, doing things that the traditional education system, you know, can't do. So we're just gonna be a bunch of moles going in and you know, changing the narrative.
Yeah, and I think Cynthia brings up a good point as well. You know, education, I mean, the system is fundamentally not set up for us or with our interests in mind. Um, Historically, that's been our experience, even going back to the late 1800s when the United States first started to institute public education in Aztlan. Before that, I mean, the other options were you could go to Catholic schools or you could go to, there are actually a lot of Presbyterian schools that were set up by founders in the East, but the Presbyterian schools and the public schools explicitly were trying to churn out Americanized workers. And I feel like that's always been our experience. If you ever look at the schools that are predominantly raza, you know, they're not promoting, you know, like any kind of like academic rigor, anything like that. They're like, let's just get them to graduate and, you know, get them in menial work. And that's kind of how it's always been set up. That's why I think it's really important for, you know, as much of us to get in there as possible because, you know, we live in the society, the public education system, we know is not set up for us. You know, if we can spark it in the minds of the children, you know, to start thinking about themselves differently, you know, they can eventually break free of those confines. And that brings us, or brings it back as well to another point that Cynthia made, you know, about, you know, going out and protesting, things like that. You know, to have a successful protest, something that's going to be long-term in a movement, it requires a lot of organization.
Exactly.
You know, so we absolutely, that's why we need to get to, you know, showing another way because, you know, if the kids just go through, you know, they get the American myths, and that's one of the important things as well, you know, from the American perspective to undermine Chicanos is to get us to stop thinking about ourselves like that, to
Yeah.
separate, you know, our long-standing ties to the land, to make us think that, oh, we're just some immigrants who came over yesterday, you know, with no long-term connections, you know, throughout the generations to this land.
Mhm.
You know, when the reverse is actually true. We've been here longer, you know, through the migrations back and forth. But, you know, if they can undermine that thought in our head that, you know, we actually do have a right to the land, that this is our actual native land, then, you know, they can undermine our really ability to organize. Because if all the young, you know, Chicanos and Chicanas realize that, you know, this is our native land that we do have a right to, that we're not just some guests, we should just be happy with whatever scraps we can get, you know, that fundamentally changes the conversation that we can have amongst ourselves and what we will, you know, organize and demand for. And that's one of the things, you know, bringing it back again to the partido that I think it's so important because, you know, there is that level of consciousness, there is that, you know, understanding that we're not, you know, just some random people who just said, hey, you know, United States, let's go there. No, we're in the land that we've always historically inhabited, you know. But
Exactly. You know, that's, you know, and I think that's the fear in teaching our history. You know, they fear that all these chicanitos, chicanitas, you know, all these little youngsters will have a sense of place and a sense of being, you know, and to keep the empire going, they can't have the peons thinking they have a sense of place and being, you know. Pero that brings us to our end. Raza, I once again would like to thank Professor Andrew Ayala and Profesora uh, and California State Chair of the Partido, Cynthia Garcia, for being here with us. Catch us every Tuesday and Thursdays, Raza, Nuestra America Radio Online. Catch us on YouTube under Raza Unida Media with Good Morning Aztlan. Y que viva la raza. Gracias a todos.
Que viva.
viva.